Hudson County viewers, thanks for joining us again on this chilly winter afternoon. I am your host, the man that's known to be skating on ice like Christy Yamaguchi, riding back in the Chevy eating blowfish sushi. And today we are with Mayor-elect Ravi Bhalla, of course, in the Mile Square City. Ravi, thanks for coming on again.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Yamaguchi.
So, it's been a little over a month since the election. You've had some time to reflect, some time to just, I'm not going to say relax, but, just take it all in, everything that happened these past 6 months or so. So when you look back on it all and you think about your victory, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
The first thing that comes to my mind is being very grateful to live in Hoboken, the city I love. It's a wonderful community, and I also think about the democratic process. It's never pretty. It's a messy process, but it's something I think we should value and cherish as Americans, the ability to get into the public square, speak about issues you care about, and really let the public and the electorate make its decision as to, who society wants to be its leaders.
So glad you brought up the democratic process. One thing I wanted to speak about today was very quietly it came up on the council a week and a half ago that there's the potential of bringing back the runoff election, something that the voters of Hoboken decided that they did not want approximately 6-7 years ago. So this is something that may come back. I mean, obviously it'll eventually come up to a referendum if we even get to that point, but what's your take on this potential to bring back the runoff elections?
Well, there are legitimate arguments on both sides. My concern is that I have a few concerns. One of them is that when you have this runoff system, which gives you about 4 weeks between the first ballot and the runoff, what we've seen historically in Hudson County is a lot of deal making, which is not the best process in a democratic election. So that's obviously problematic. Voter fatigue, costs, those are problematic. As well as the fact that in Hoboken, at least in the last 40 years, the runoff has not made any difference whatsoever in the final outcome of the election. So every person who's won on first ballot for mayor has won in the runoff. So we found that in Hoboken, the runoff for mayor at least has had zero consequence in the ultimate outcome of the election. So I think that's a legitimate consideration. My feeling is that on the flip side, having an election where somebody might win with 10 or 15% of the vote is not optimal either. One thing that I think, we might want to consider is going to the state of New Jersey and maybe having a more reasonable threshold for a runoff. New York City, for example, has a 40% threshold, meaning that if you can't get more than 40%, that would trigger a runoff. In the state of New Jersey, it's 50%, which is obviously much more difficult. So it's a debatable issue. The people did decide, and we have to follow whatever the voters of Hoboken wanted with that policy.
Sure. Now, you mentioned that the potential of quote-unquote deal-making, which, obviously happens in Hudson and New Jersey throughout, but could you give me a bit of a specific about what you mean, how this could be problematic when we're talking about the idea of maybe bringing back runoffs?
Well, God forbid somebody said, well, if you support me for a re-election, I'll give you a job in City Hall, or if you support me in the runoff, I'll give you X, Y, and Z. And that kind of a trade-off, that kind of patronage that Hudson County has a reputation for is disfavored. It's disfavored by our electorate, and the runoff creates that opportunity, which is exactly what I'm talking about.
Gotcha. So I guess that it would go without saying that there'll be no sort of this type of politicking in the Bala administration?
No, everything that we've campaigned on is based upon honest government. That's what we ran on 8 years ago. We had a mayor who was arrested for corruption within 4 weeks of his administration. We ran to reform government, to make it more transparent, to make it honest, to restore integrity and professionalism in city government, and that's exactly what you're going to see in my administration.
Very good. Now, speaking about your 8 years on the council, and you're looking back on that, what do you think is maybe the 1 or 2 achievements there, legislation you introduced, something that you were able to take action on that you're most proud of?
Well, first and foremost, the economic turnaround of Hoboken. We started with a junk bond status rating. Nobody would let Hoboken borrow money for capital improvements, for a fire truck, or for a rehabilitation. And that was because we had structural deficits year in and year out. Our budget was overspent. We had a 70% tax increase. So we went from a junk bond status rating to AA plus within an 8-year period. That is a transformation that I'll always be proud of, having a role in that transformation. We saved the hospital. That saved us over 1,000 jobs. I was able to increase the stock of affordable housing in Hoboken by legislating amendments to the rent control ordinance that kept rent control as one of the many menus of options of affordable housing. So these are very proud accomplishments I can say I played a small role in, and I hope to continue on those issues in the years to come.
Gotcha. Now, one last point on the actual election. So, as everybody watching knows, or will eventually watch knows, there was a flyer that came out in the 11th hour. It said, "Don't let terrorism take over our town," and it was done over a Mike DeFusco flyer layout, and of course your picture was there. Now, there's been a lot of speculation about who did the flyer, who was involved. Obviously, we don't know. Hoboken police are investigating. Councilman DeFusco has been adamant that he had nothing to do with this, and that's basically where it stands. But I mean, when you take a step back and review what's happened there in the past 6 weeks or so, I mean, what's your take on this whole situation?
I think it's disgraceful that anybody would associate the word terrorism with the Sikh turban. The Sikh turban represents equality, justice, love for all of humanity. It's the exact opposite of that. So for that flyer to come out was extraordinarily hurtful to myself, but much more importantly, it was my daughter's first experience with racism. She did not understand why somebody would associate an article of faith with such a horrible word. It's like being called the N-word for an African American. So, it's my sincere hope that whoever was involved with this, whether they were trying to hurt me or help me or whatever machinations were involved, this is beyond the pale. This is outside the rules of what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. You do not use that word in the context of the public sphere. It's utterly offensive. And I raised my children to be proud Sikhs, to be proud of their religion, to be proud of their identity. So that type of conduct is so reprehensible to everything that I believe in as an American and as a Sikh that I'm very, very hopeful that whoever was involved in this is held accountable.
Understood, of course. Now, on a follow-up, I mean, Councilman DeFusco was pretty aggravated with you, to put it mildly, a few weeks ago when you did not stand with him and, basically say, I understand, or I believe you, that this had nothing to do with you. So why did you not take him up on that offer?
I'm not sure what offer you're referring to, but,
at the council meeting, I believe it was the middle of October, he said, I want to help make sure that whoever created this flyer gets caught. Would you please stand with me, since we were both negatively impacted by this? And again, as he said from day one, was adamant that he did not create the flyer, and he wanted you to basically, for lack of a better term, exonerate him and say, okay, I believe you, and I don't think you did it.
Well, he specifically asked me to share with him in putting up a reward, which is completely inappropriate as per legal guidelines, where the Code 2C enumerates specific offenses for which an award by the state police, not a private citizen, is appropriate. Usually violent crimes, murder, rape, kidnapping. This didn't fall under any of those offenses, and it was arguably viewed as interfering with an ongoing investigation. So, whether or not I think he was involved or wasn't involved, it's really not my place to make that determination. It's the place of law enforcement to make that determination. I do feel very bad that family members of Councilman DeFusco, I believe his sister, and other family members have been strained or called names by members of the public because of this situation. That adds more harm to the incident itself So I do sympathize with that, but it's really important for the police, for us to let the police do its job and to respect the investigation as it takes its course.
Okay, very interesting point regarding the reward. I did not know that. I don't think most people did. Now, on to the opposite end of the spectrum when we're talking about Sikhs. One of your childhood friends, Gubir Guwal, nominated to be the state attorney general just the other day by Governor-elect Phil Murphy, so that obviously must have been something you were pretty happy about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great honor for myself to serve as mayor of Hoboken. I think having known Attorney General Grewal the better part of my life, he's an outstanding lawyer, and more so, he's just an outstanding human being who really believes in our country, our state constitution. He's an excellent attorney. He understands the policy priorities of the governor-elect, and I think he is, a well-suited person to lead the city, the state, in this office as the next Attorney General.
And on final notion on this point, just when you're looking at New Jersey and beyond, and you see Sikhs, holding high office, getting nominated for high-level positions, what do you think that means, 5, 10, 20 years down the line in this country?
I mean, it's important, whether it's the Sikh community or really any minority or vulnerable community, to have a seat at the table. My election happened in the context where you had a transgender woman who was elected to the state legislature in the state of Virginia.
Right.
And it's important for minorities that might be under assault at the national level with respect to their rights to be empowered. And this is a means of empowerment. When I was a child in the New Jersey public schools, I was subject to school bullying, and I didn't have a place to go. I didn't have a role model who was a councilman or a state legislator or a judge or a prosecutor. So I think having minorities elevated to positions of authority where we're not on the side of the table asking for something, but on the side of the table making decisions, is very critical to making sure that our rights are protected, our interests are protected, not just as minorities, but as Americans.
All right, interesting. Now, let's get back specifically to Miles Square City issues. So one thing that I know has been a priority for you is the Union Dry Dock. Of course, that waterfront property, which is currently owned by New York Waterway. And we know that NJ Transit is at least considering making a purchase of that land, and there is talk of that being used as basically a ferry dock unit where they refuel the ferries, which of course takes people from Hoboken to the city, and they used to be stationed in Weehawken until recently. So for those that haven't been following along on this, could you just tell us a little bit about your position, what you'd like to see happen, and what you think will happen in early 2018?
Well, that piece of land is the last piece of industrial property on the Hoboken waterfront, which, as you know, is the jewel of not just Hoboken, but the county of Hudson and the state of New Jersey. So the people who enjoy the Hoboken waterfront are not just Hoboken residents, but people from across the state. And this is a historic opportunity now that Union Dry Dock is winding up its business for us to have that land be part of open park space. So to the extent that New York Waterways wants to use that property for repair and refueling and maintenance, it's our position that that would conflict with the priority of having more open space. And we're trying to work cooperatively with New York Waterway and New Jersey Transit because we do support New York Waterway's function. We rely upon their ferry service as a means of mass transit infrastructure and service.
Of course.
So we're trying to look for a solution that would allow New York Waterways to operate and even expand, and that would preserve our waterfront. Bayonne is very interested in hosting New York Waterways and their operations on land that's owned by the Port Authority. The Port Authority is interested in that conversation, and I'm hopeful that we can come up with a holistic solution that would regionalize ferry service so that Bayonne can receive that benefit. Hopefully New York Waterways can receive an economic benefit, the Hoboken waterfront can be preserved, and the residents of Hudson County can be better serviced.
Ambitious plan, government always works slow, but, fingers crossed, we'll see what happens with that. So, On another point, obviously in the new year, we're going to have a reorg meeting, which happens annually, of course. New city council president will be coming to term, and obviously the mayor does not pick the council president. I mean, it becomes between the board of 9 that sits up on the dais, but in an ideal world, who do you think is the most qualified, or the next in line, or who would you just like to see be the next council president, if it was up to you, which, like I said, I know it isn't.
You know, as you said, it is not up to me. I don't have one vote. I have 0 votes on the council with respect to the January 3rd reorg meeting. I think there's a lot of talent on the city council. We've got an excellent council, city council. I think all of the council members are uniquely positioned to lead the city as council president in their own ways. Traditionally, new council members are reticent to come into that role their first year on the council. So I would expect that our 2 new council members may be less likely to seek to assume that role, but with respect to the other 7, I think it's really the decision of the council as a whole, and whatever decision they make, I would respect that decision and make sure that I can have a cooperative and working relationship with whoever the council president is to really kind of move our city forward.
All right, so in short, you're not going to give me a name.
That is correct, John.
Okay, fair enough. So now, I know something that, there have been some dissenters in Hoboken political circles. I know it's shocking for you to even think about. but some people believe that due to the involvement of stronger foundations, the super PAC that supports a few large labor unions, and this was a big money election, as you know, and there's some people that are a little nervous about the future of development in Hoboken. So is there any way you could quell those worries about the involvement of, labor and, again, just the future of development in the Mile Square City?
Sure. Labor unions strongly supported Councilman DeFusco. They strongly supported Council President Giattino. They strongly supported Freeholder Romano. And there was also support for my campaign. So all 4 of the major candidates received labor support. I don't think you should assume that because you have labor support, especially the support I received, which was from labor unions primarily focused on public works projects, which dovetailed with a major priority of mine, which is infrastructure, public infrastructure, that would have a leap of logic to being pro-development or pro-overdevelopment in any way. I support growth, but I think infrastructure is a priority. Among those infrastructure projects, as a top priority, is Rebuild by Design. That's a $250 million project that will provide comprehensive flood protection for the city of Hoboken. A major federally funded public works project that not just the residents, but obviously labor, good labor, would have an interest in supporting. So I do support responsible growth, responsible development, but I really believe that infrastructure, public infrastructure, whether it's mass transit, our water mains, sewer lines, streets and roads, that has to come first before we can accommodate further growth.
Okay, got it. Now, as far as your transition team, first of all, I guess congrats is in order. You got over 100 people on the team already. That's not too shabby. But with that said, I just wanted to really hear about the nuts and bolts of what that transition team is doing and will continue doing until you're swearing in on January 1st. Because, in New Jersey politics, we hear about all these people working on all these different subjects for the transition, and sometimes they don't meet, sometimes we don't even know who the people are, and you get the point.
Right.
So I just wanted you to give us a little insight on what's actually going on behind the curtain there.
Sure. So I tasked each committee of the transition team, and parenthetically, I invited all of my opponents in the mayoral race to chair a different subcommittee or a different committee of the transition team. Fortunately, most of them actually agreed in a show of unity to serve on my transition team. I've tasked them with with a discrete task, which is by December 22nd, I would like at least three substantive policy recommendations in that subject area. So we have infrastructure, we have open space, we have economic development, we have rebuild by design, we've got several other small business, several other committees. So I'm hoping by December 22nd, I'll receive 3 substantive policy recommendations that we can try to implement in the coming years. The good news is that we have actually over 150 volunteer citizens of Hoboken who have joined the transition team since it was formed, and we're trying to harness the intellectual capital of Hoboken, which I think is very untapped at this point, to really kind of elevate Hoboken to the next level through this transition process. So they've been meeting very actively. All of the committees have been meeting. They're very enthusiastic. They're very excited about the opportunity going into next year, and I'm very excited to learn more about what they're going to come up with in terms of substantive policy recommendations.
Okay, well, sounds promising. Now, based on what you just said, and based on what I've been hearing, it would be fair to say, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that Council President Jen Giattino declined your offer to be part of the team. Of course, she was one of the mayoral candidates, and, you know, you guys weren't on the best terms by the time this whole thing was wrapped up. So, you know, first of all, does that bother you or offend you in any way? And secondly, do you think this is someone you could have a working relationship in the next 4 years?
Sure. No, it doesn't bother or offend me in any way. I was very hopeful that Council President Giattino, given her a good track record in constituent services, would chair my constituent services committee. It's really, her option. People have family obligations, especially after a grueling campaign, and obligations she has to her 6th Ward constituents that is a priority. So, that doesn't bother me at all. Fortunately, Assemblywoman Annette Shapiro agreed to step up and chair that committee. But I really look forward to working with Council President Giattino as well as the whole council to just move our city forward.
Got it. So I'm glad we were able to discuss a number of topics today. Just anything else you wanted to add before we part ways?
I think, as I always say, Hoboken, the best is yet to come with respect to Hoboken, as Frank Sinatra once said. Mayor Zimmer has laid a foundation for Hoboken, cleaned up a lot of the ineptitude and borderline corruption, erased structural deficits in our city, got competent professionals at City Hall. So I think really the sky is the limit, and we have great things to come in the future.
Ravi Bhalla, the next mayor of Hoboken. It looks like there's a lot of things in the pipeline. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Have an excellent holiday season, and I'll see you next week.